A tiny dime, the kind most people never even look at twice. But what if one of them is more interesting than it seems? Welcome back to Change Your Life. Today, we're exploring 4 Roosevelt dimes that continue to appear in everyday circulation but still catch the attention of collectors. 2018 P. Roosevelt Dime. 2013 P. Roosevelt Dime. 1999 D. Roosevelt Dime. 2001 P. Roosevelt Dime. These coins feature the classic torch, olive branch, and oak branch reverse design, symbolizing liberty, peace, and strength. At first glance, they look completely ordinary, small, worn, and heavily circulated coins that pass through millions of hands without a second thought. But in coin collecting, ordinary is exactly where the search begins. Collectors often examine these dimes closely for minting variations, strike differences, and rare errors that can make certain coins stand out from billions of others. And the most surprising part? Some of the most interesting discoveries in modern coin collecting have come from coins just like these, coins that looked completely normal at first glance. So before you drop another dime into a vending machine or forget about it in your pocket, stay with me until the end. Because one small detail could completely change how you see it. Let's begin with coin number 1, the 2.268-gram coin that quietly passed through millions of hands, without anyone realizing what they were holding. On a cold morning in Philadelphia, a small plastic bin slid down a metal track inside the United States Mint. Inside it, thousands of blank copper nickel discs. Each one identical in shape. Each one waiting for the same fate. And none of them aware that in a matter of seconds, they would stop being metal discs and become history. The press came down hard. A violent, controlled impact that lasted less than a heartbeat. And just like that, the 2018 P. Roosevelt dime was born. No ceremony. No attention. No pause. Just pressure, metal, and speed. In 2018, America was moving fast in a different way than people realized. Cash was still alive, but fading. Digital payments were rising. Coins were still everywhere, vending machines, parking meters, small stores, but their emotional importance had almost disappeared. A dime in 2018 could still buy almost nothing meaningful. Yet millions of them moved daily through hands that never stopped to question what they were holding. That is the strange truth of modern currency. The less value a coin has in daily life, the less attention it receives. And the less attention it receives, the more invisible its manufacturing becomes. The Philadelphia Mint operates like a machine that never sleeps. Steel presses, feeding systems, vibration control units, inspection cameras, and an endless flow of planchets, blank metal discs ready to become coins. The 2018 P. Roosevelt dime came from this system at extreme speed. Each dime struck under immense pressure, forming the portrait of Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse, and the torch, olive branch, and oak branch on the reverse, symbols of liberty, peace, and strength. But here is what most people never realize. At high-speed minting levels, perfection is not the goal. Consistency is. And consistency allows microscopic variation to slip through unnoticed. Not often, but enough to matter. There is a specific stage in the striking process where metal flow is still stabilizing for a fraction of a second after impact. That fraction is where most modern anomalies are born. We will come back to that moment, because it explains why some dimes behave differently under magnification years later. At first glance, the 2018 P. Roosevelt dime looks completely ordinary. It is small, light, almost easy to lose between fingers. It weighs approximately 2.268 grams, a number that seems insignificant until you realize how precisely modern minting controls that weight. Not too heavy. Not too light. Just enough copper-nickel alloy to maintain structural integrity during circulation. If you place it in your hand, it feels almost weightless compared to older silver coins from earlier decades. And that is intentional. Modern coinage is designed for efficiency, not presence. But collectors know something important. Even in standardized systems, variation still exists. And variation is where interest begins. If you ever study this coin seriously, you do not start with excitement. You start with control. Step 1. Hold the coin by its edges only. Never touch the flat surfaces unnecessarily. Step 2. Place it under a single low-angle light source. This reveals surface relief that overhead lighting hides completely. Step 3. Use a 10x loupe. Focus on Roosevelt's eye, the lettering, and the torch lines on the reverse. Step 4. Rotate the coin vertically. This is where alignment errors can sometimes appear, known as rotational die errors, where the reverse is not perfectly aligned with the obverse. Step 5. Weigh it on a simple digital scale. A normal 2018p Roosevelt dime should remain extremely close to 2.268 grams. A deviation does not automatically mean rarity. But it always means check again. Because coins do not lie. They only reveal inconsistencies slowly. Most 2018p dimes will show no collectible errors at all. But in numismatics, most is never the full story. One of the most commonly misunderstood features is machine doubling. It can create a shadow-like effect on lettering or design edges. At first glance, it looks like a strong error. But under grading standards, it is mechanical vibration, not a die creation error. It carries no significant premium in most cases. True doubled die obverse, DDO, however, is different. That occurs at the die creation stage, producing structured, consistent doubling that repeats across multiple strikes. Collectors watch for that difference carefully. Because one is noise, and the other is birth. Other potential but less common varieties include die cracks forming raised lines across surfaces, off-center strikes where the design shifts from the coin center, broad strikes where the coin escapes its retaining collar during striking. Each tells a different story about pressure, alignment, and timing inside the minting process. But most 2018p dimes never show dramatic errors. They simply exist. Quietly. Efficiently. Let's return to the number. 2.268 grams. It looks too precise to matter. But in modern numismatics, consistency of weight is a foundation of authenticity. A simple digital scale can immediately separate normal circulation coins from potential anomalies. If a dime is significantly off this weight, collectors do not assume value. They assume investigation. Because variation could come from surface contamination, environmental wear, or extremely rarely, incorrect planchet use. And wrong planchet errors are among the most significant possibilities in modern minting, though still exceptionally rare. That rarity is what keeps collectors watching every coin carefully. Historical auction records suggest that standard circulated 2018p Roosevelt dimes remain extremely common in the collector marketplace. Most examples trade at face value unless preserved in exceptional mint state condition. Documented sales have shown that MS65 to MS67 graded examples can attract collector interest, but only when certified by trusted grading services like PCGS or NGC. Values fluctuate with market conditions, and professional certification is required before any value can be assigned. Raw coins, even if they look clean, carry no guaranteed premium. That is the reality of modern coin collecting. It is not about hope. It is about verification. Now step away from machines and grading standards. Think about where this dime actually went. A cashier in a small gas station in Ohio handing it back as change. A student in a vending machine moment between classes. A commuter dropping it into a metro fare tray without even looking at it. Millions of identical moments. Different lives. Same coin type. And that is the strange emotional truth of modern currency. The more identical something becomes, the more human stories it quietly collects. Without anyone noticing. There is one subtle production behavior inside high-speed dime striking that even experienced collectors often overlook: a tiny interaction between die pressure and metal rebound that can create surface differences that only appear under specific angled light years later. And once you understand that behavior, you will never look at a modern dime as ordinary again. But the 2018p is only the beginning. Because the next coin takes that same system and shows what happens when it slightly breaks in 2013. There is a moment in every minting system that looks completely harmless from the outside. Nothing changes visually. Nothing slows down. Nothing stops. But inside the metal, something microscopic shifts. And that shift is exactly where collectors later begin to find questions. In the case of the 2018 Roosevelt Dime, that shift is not a single dramatic event. It is repetition. Millions of strikes. Same pressure. Same dyes. Same copper-nickel alloy flowing under identical force. And yet, no two coins are ever truly identical. Not in the way most people assume. When people first look at modern dimes, they assume perfection equals sameness. Same weight. Same design. Same composition. But numismatics teaches something uncomfortable. Perfect systems still produce imperfect outputs. Because metal is not theoretical. It is physical. It expands under heat. It resists under pressure. It rebounds slightly after impact. And that rebound is where subtle variation begins. That is why a coin weighing 2.268 grams is never just a number. It is a range. A controlled range. But still a range. Inside the Philadelphia Mint, high-speed presses do not pause between strikes. They operate in continuous cycles. Planch it in. Strike. Release. Repeat. And every cycle introduces microscopic wear on the die surface. Not enough to be visible, but enough to slightly change how metal flows into engraved recesses. This is where something interesting happens. Early strikes from a fresh die look sharp. Midlife strikes look balanced. Late strikes begin to soften at the edges. Same design. Different expression. Collectors sometimes miss this completely. Because they expect visible errors. But in modern coinage, the most important changes are often gradual, not dramatic. A collector in New Jersey once sorted a roll of 2018 dimes from a bank. He expected nothing unusual. And for the first 40 coins, he was right. Then one coin felt slightly different in rotation under light. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just visually unstable. Under magnification, Roosevelt's portrait showed faint uneven relief on one side of the face. Not strong enough to qualify as a clear doubled die. Not clean enough to dismiss completely. This is the zone where most collectors become uncertain. And uncertainty is where curiosity survives. One of the most misunderstood features in modern Roosevelt dimes is machine doubling. It creates a flattened or shadowed edge on letters or design elements. At first glance, it looks like value. But it is not. It is mechanical vibration during strike separation. A slight bounce. A micro shift. No extra hubbing. No die duplication. Just physics. True doubled die obverse, DDO, is fundamentally different. It originates in the die creation process, where the hub impresses the design multiple times with slight misalignment. That produces structured doubling that repeats consistently across multiple coins. Collectors pay attention to this difference because one is accidental motion. And the other is manufacturing origin. Every serious inspection returns to the same anchor point. 2.268 grams. On a simple digital scale, this number becomes a baseline identity for modern Roosevelt dimes. But here is where collectors become careful. Weight alone never confirms rarity. It only confirms expectation. A coin matching expected weight does not guarantee normality. And a coin deviating does not guarantee value. It only signals that something in production, environment, or post-mint handling may have altered it. That is why professionals never stop at the scale. They combine it with 10x loop inspection, low-angle single light source analysis, edge examination for copper-nickel consistency, vertical rotation check for alignment. Because coins are not judged by one trait. They are judged by consistency across all traits. It is easy to forget that coins like the 2018 P dime move through human life constantly. A dime dropped into a parking meter in rain. A dime returned as change at a gas station counter. A dime sitting forgotten in a pocket until laundry day. These are not dramatic moments. But they are real. And over time, those moments build invisible history. Not because the coin changes meaning, but because people stop noticing it altogether. And what is ignored long enough eventually becomes invisible history. Historical auction records suggest that most 2018 P Roosevelt dimes remain at face value in circulation condition. Even uncirculated examples require strong grading confirmation through PCGS or NGC to gain collector-level attention. MS65, MS66, and MS67 grades represent key quality thresholds where condition begins to matter significantly. Values fluctuate with market conditions, and professional certification is required before any value can be assigned. Raw coins, even visually appealing ones, carry no reliable premium without verification. This is not pessimism. It is structure. And structure is what keeps numismatics credible. There is a subtle characteristic in modern dimes that often goes unnoticed. Slight variation in surface reflectivity under angled light. Not damage. Not cleaning. But microtextural differences caused by die pressure and metal flow timing. Under magnification, this can appear as faint unevenness in fields or design contrast. Collectors do not assign value to it automatically. But they record it. Because repeated observation across many coins sometimes reveals patterns that only become meaningful later. That is how numismatic understanding evolves. Slowly. Through repetition. A mint worker in Philadelphia, late 2013. Same machines. Same sound. Same copper-nickel blanks sliding through metal chutes. But something subtle had changed in the rhythm of production. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to stop presses. Just enough to change how metal behaved under pressure. And that is where this story begins. In 2013, the United States was deep into a digital transition phase. Cash was still everywhere, but less emotionally important than before. People were paying with cards, phones, online systems. Coins still circulated, but they were becoming background objects in daily life. A Roosevelt dime in 2013 had almost no attention value in public awareness. It was just change. Just noise in pockets. Just weight without meaning. But in minting terms, 2013 was not as stable as it appeared from the outside. Because stability in production is not about appearance. It is about die condition. And die condition always changes with use. Every Roosevelt dime die starts life sharp. Extremely sharp. Every line in Roosevelt's face is crisp. Every letter in Liberty is precise. Every detail in the torch, olive branch, and oak branch reverse is deeply engraved. But high-speed production does something unavoidable. It wears steel. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. But slowly. Cycle after cycle. Strike after strike. And by the time 2013 production runs are in full motion, many dies are no longer at fresh stage. They are in midlife. That means slightly reduced sharpness. Minor fatigue lines beginning to form. Micropressure inconsistencies across strikes. And this is where collectors begin to see differences. Not obvious differences. Subtle ones. Even in 2013, one thing remains stable. 2.268 grams. A standard Roosevelt dime weight. A number that anchors modern coin identity. But here is the paradox. Even when weight stays perfectly stable, visual output still changes. Because weight is material quantity, not strike quality. And strike quality is what defines collectible interest. A coin can weigh exactly 2.268 grams and still have weak detail zones, slightly uneven relief, subtle die fatigue marks, minor strike pressure variation, Collectors learn this early. Beginners don't. A collector in Texas once described sorting 2013 P dimes from a bankroll. He said most coins felt identical. But one coin created a hesitation. Not visually dramatic. Just slightly different under rotating light. The torch lines on the reverse appeared softer on one side. Roosevelt's jawline looked marginally less defined. No clear doubling. No obvious error. Just inconsistency. An inconsistency is where serious collectors slow down. To properly study a 2013 P Roosevelt dime, collectors use a controlled method. First, a single low-angle light source. This removes visual noise and reveals surface structure. Second, a 10x loop. Focus shifts to Roosevelt's eye contour. Lettering edges in United States of America. Torch flame structure on reverse. Third, vertical rotation. This checks alignment stability between obverse and reverse dies. Fourth, weight confirmation using a digital scale. Again, expected baseline. 2.268 grams. But the real analysis is never just weight. It is how the surface behaves under controlled conditions. 2013 Roosevelt dimes show a recurring misunderstanding among collectors. Machine doubling versus structural doubling. Machine doubling appears as a flat, secondary edge on lettering. It is caused by die movement during separation. It looks interesting. But it has no real numismatic premium. True doubled die obverse, DDO, however, is created during hubbing. It produces consistent doubling patterns across multiple areas of the design. Collectors pay attention to this distinction because it separates illusion from origin. One is motion. The other is manufacturing truth. Even though nothing officially changed in design or composition, 2013 coins often show slightly different strike consistency compared to earlier 2010s issues. Not enough to declare a new type, but enough to notice under repeated inspection. This is not rare in minting history. It is normal die lifecycle behavior. As dies age, pressure distribution becomes less uniform. And less uniform pressure creates subtle surface variation. That variation is not dramatic. But it is detectable. And detection is everything in numismatics. Many beginners try to compare dime analysis logic to larger coins. They think, if quarters can be measured precisely, dimes should behave the same way. But here is the reality. While quarters often sit around 5.67 grams in clad form, and silver issues around 6.25 grams, dimes operate on a much smaller scale. That makes variation harder to interpret. Because in smaller coins, surface wear matters more visually. Microloss in plating matters more proportionally. Strike pressure variation is more noticeable under magnification. So even if a dime remains at 2.268 grams, its appearance can still change significantly. That is why experienced collectors never rely on weight alone. They combine multiple indicators. Historical auction records suggest that most 2013 P Roosevelt dimes remain common circulation coins with minimal premium in standard condition. Even uncirculated examples require professional grading confirmation through PCGS or NGC to establish collectible tier placement. MS65 to MS67 grades represent the key thresholds where condition becomes meaningful in the marketplace. Values fluctuate with market conditions, and professional certification is required before any value can be assigned. Raw coins are not automatically valuable. Even clean-looking coins require verification. This is the structure of modern numismatics. Not speculation. Verification. In 2013, this dime passed through millions of ordinary moments. A coffee purchase in Chicago. A vending machine in a school hallway. A parking meter in New York rain. A pocket change exchange in a small grocery store. No one paused. No one studied it. No one imagined it would be analyzed years later under magnification. But that is how modern coins live their real life. Not as collectibles, but as invisible participants in human routine. The most important lesson from 2013 is not about rarity. It is about perception. Because once you start noticing slight differences in strike quality, you stop seeing coins as identical objects. And you start seeing them as production events. Each one slightly different. Each one carrying tiny traces of machine behavior. And that awareness changes everything. 2013 does not break the system. But it reveals something important. Even stable minting years contain internal variation that only becomes visible under careful study. And once you accept that idea, the next coin takes you into a year where things do not just vary slightly. They begin to feel inconsistent in a way collectors immediately notice. There is a moment in any collection where randomness stops feeling random. At first, you assume it is coincidence. A weak strike here. A slightly dull surface there. A faint line that might be nothing more than circulation wear. But then it repeats. And repetition changes everything. Because repetition is no longer noise. It becomes data. A dealer in Pennsylvania once described sorting 2013 Roosevelt Dimes in bulk. He expected uniformity. That is what modern coinage usually delivers. But halfway through the roll, something shifted in his perception. He started noticing a recurring softness in the reverse design, specifically in the torch flames. Not damaged. Not misstruck. Just slightly less sharp than expected. At first, he ignored it. Then he saw it again. And again. And that is where curiosity becomes investigation. 2013 does not represent a redesign. It does not represent a composition change. But it does represent something more subtle. Die lifecycle accumulation across mass production runs. In simple terms, fresh dies equals sharp detail. Midlife dies equals slight softening. Late life dies equals noticeable loss of precision. By 2013, many Roosevelt dime dies were no longer fresh. They were operating in mid-cycle conditions. And mid-cycle is where variation becomes visible enough for collectors to detect patterns. Not dramatic errors, but consistent micro-differences. Every time collectors verify a 2013 dime, they return to the same baseline. 2.268 grams. And every time, the number behaves perfectly. Because weight is one of the most stable aspects of modern minting. But here is the trap. A coin can be perfectly weighted and still visually inconsistent. Because weight does not measure strike force distribution, die wear level, surface metal flow, microscopic relief collapse. Weight is identity, not condition. And condition is what collectors actually evaluate. On Roosevelt dimes, the reverse design is not just symbolic. It is structurally complex. Torch flame lines, olive branch detail, oak branch curvature. These are fine line elements. And fine line elements reveal die wear first. In 2013 P dimes, collectors often report slightly flattened torch flame edges, reduced contrast between branch leaves, minor smoothing in central flame structure. Not enough to call it damage, but enough to notice under magnification. A 10x loop becomes essential here. Because the human eye at normal distance misses what controlled light reveals. As with earlier years, machine doubling continues to confuse beginners. It appears as a faint second edge on letters, slight shadowing on numbers, flattened secondary outline. But it is not true doubling. It is mechanical shift during strike separation. No additional hubbing. No die error creation. Just motion instability in the final fraction of a second. True doubled die obverse, DDO, remains rare and structurally distinct. Collectors look for consistent, repeated doubling, not random blur. Because consistency indicates origin. And origin determines value potential. Experienced collectors sometimes notice a phenomenon informally called the three-coin effect. It works like this. First coin looks normal. Second coin shows slight variation. Third coin confirms a pattern. This is psychological and analytical at the same time. Because once variation repeats across multiple examples, the mind stops treating it as coincidence. It becomes classification. In 2013 Roosevelt Dimes, this effect appears often in bulk rolls. Not because the coins are flawed, but because they were produced under revolving die conditions. Historical auction records suggest that 2013 Roosevelt Dimes remain overwhelmingly common in circulation condition. Even uncirculated examples require certification from PCGS or NGC before they are considered within collectible grading tiers. MS65, MS66, and MS67 grades define condition-based value thresholds. Values fluctuate with market conditions, and professional certification is required before any value can be assigned. Raw coins carry uncertainty. And in modern numismatics, uncertainty reduces confidence. This is why grading exists, not to inflate value, but to stabilize interpretation. The human brain is not designed for microvariation detection. It categorizes quickly. Coin looks normal, ignore. Coin looks damaged, discard mentally. Coin looks unusual, investigate. But 2013 dimes live in the middle category. Almost normal. And almost normal is the hardest category to detect. Because it does not trigger attention immediately. It only appears after repetition. After sorting. After comparison. That is why collectors see what casual users never do. They do not look once. They look hundreds of times. There is something strangely quiet about studying coins like this. No treasure map. No dramatic discovery moment. Just repetition. Light. Metal. Observation. And slowly, a realization forms. These coins were never meant to be noticed individually. They were designed to function collectively. But collectors break that system apart. One coin at a time. And in doing so, they reveal differences that were never intended to matter. But still do. 2013 is subtle. Almost controlled. Even its inconsistencies are soft. But in the timeline of Roosevelt Dimes, not all years behave this quietly. Some years carry sharper production signatures. Stronger variations. More noticeable structural differences. And when you move forward in the sequence of modern dimes, you eventually reach a year where collectors stop debating softness and start analyzing visible design behavior changes in circulation. That year is 1999. A year where the Roosevelt dime begins to feel less like a smooth continuation and more like a system under visible pressure. A sorting table in Denver, Colorado, late 1999. Metal trays stacked in rows. Rolls of fresh dimes arriving from banks still warm in circulation terms, coins that had barely settled into the economy. A mint worker slides open a box labeled 10 cents Denver issue. Inside, thousands of identical copper-nickel Roosevelt dimes. But what nobody in that room realized was simple. They were no longer just handling modern change. They were handling a production phase where small inconsistencies began to accumulate in a way collectors would only understand years later. 1999 sits in a strange place in U.S. coin history. It is not early modern coinage. It is not yet fully digital era collecting behavior. It is a bridge year. Cash is still dominant in daily life. But the system around it is changing quietly. Banking is becoming faster. Cash handling systems are scaling. Mint production is increasing efficiency to match demand. And when efficiency increases, microvariation becomes more noticeable in hindsight. Not immediately, but later, under collector scrutiny. The 1999 D. Roosevelt dime came from a production environment where output demand was extremely high. Denver's presses operated continuously. Planchets fed in. Die struck. Coins moved out. No pause. No reflection. just throughput. But here is the reality of high-volume minting. When speed increases, inspection time decreases. And when inspection time decreases, miner die fatigue becomes less likely to be caught early. That does not mean errors are guaranteed. It means variation has more opportunity to circulate. When modern collectors sort 1999 Roosevelt Dimes in bulk today, many describe a consistent observation. Some coins appear slightly softer in design relief. Not dramatically. Not damaged. Just less crisp compared to other nearby years. Especially in Roosevelt's facial contour. Lettering edges in United States of America. Torch flame separation on reverse. This softness is not officially categorized as an error. But it is a perception pattern. And perception patterns often lead to deeper inspection. Even in 1999, the Roosevelt dime maintains its standard identity. 2.268 grams. This number remains stable across decades of production. But by now, collectors understand something important. Weight does not reflect strike quality. A 1999 D dime can weigh perfectly correct and still show uneven die pressure distribution, slight relief flattening, minor surface flow inconsistencies. So the scale becomes confirmation, not conclusion. Under a 10x loop and low-angle lighting, 1999 D Roosevelt dimes sometimes reveal subtle surface behavior. Slightly reduced contrast between raised and flat areas. Faint die polish lines in fields. Minor inconsistency in torch flame edges. These are not rare anomalies. They are production artifacts. But collectors often misinterpret them because modern coins are expected to look identical. An expectation creates bias. Bias creates curiosity. Curiosity creates investigation. As with other modern Roosevelt dimes, machine doubling remains one of the most commonly misunderstood features. It appears as slight shadowing on letters, flat secondary outlines, edge steps on design elements. But it is not structural. It is mechanical vibration during strike separation. No additional hubbing occurs. No die creation error exists. True double die obverse, DDO, however, originates from die manufacture itself and produces consistent doubling patterns. Collectors distinguish these carefully because market interpretation depends entirely on origin type. While most 1999 D dimes are normal, collectors occasionally report die fatigue progression patterns. This is not a formal error category like off-center strikes or broad strikes. Instead, it is a gradual weakening of die sharpness over time. It manifests as softened lettering edges, reduced internal design contrast, slight flattening in high relief zones. It is not dramatic enough to classify as collectible in most cases. But it is visible under careful comparison. And comparison is where collectors begin to see years behaving differently. When collectors analyze dimes, they sometimes compare them mentally to larger coin systems like quarters. A standard clad quarter weighs 5.67 grams, and silver versions weigh around 6.25 grams. A simple digital scale can immediately reveal those differences. But in dimes, everything is compressed. So even though the dime's 2.268 grams remains stable, the proportional impact of microvariation feels larger visually. That is why collectors treat small coins with higher magnification sensitivity. Because small changes matter more when the object itself is small. Historical auction records suggest that 1999 D Roosevelt dimes remain extremely common in circulated condition. Even uncirculated examples typically require certification through PCGS or NGC before entering collectible grade discussion. MS65 through MS67 grades define condition tiers where visual quality begins to influence collector interest. Values fluctuate with market conditions, and professional certification is required before any value can be assigned. Raw coins are not automatically premium assets. Even visually appealing examples require verification to remove uncertainty. In 1999, this dime passed through a world that was rapidly changing. A vending machine transaction in a school hallway. A gas station exchange during late night shifts. A bank roll sorted by hand in small town America. A pocket coin forgotten until laundry day. No one paused. No one documented it. No one considered its future significance. And yet, decades later, collectors analyze it under controlled light, searching for production behavior patterns that were never meant to be observed individually. That is the quiet transformation of modern currency. 1999 is not dramatic. It is not rare. It is not visually extreme. But it is important for one reason. It shows that even stable mint systems produce subtle variation under high-volume conditions. And once collectors accept that idea, they begin to study nearby years more aggressively, looking for stronger anomalies, clearer deviations, more visible structural differences. And that search leads forward into 2001. A year where Roosevelt Dimes begin showing more noticeable production signatures, enough to push collectors from observation into analysis. A small coin shop in Pennsylvania, early 2001. Not a mint. Not a vault. Just a wooden counter, fluorescent lighting, and trays of mixed change being sorted by hand. A dealer flips through rolls of Roosevelt Dimes without expectation. Then pauses. Because something about the 2001 batch feels slightly more inconsistent than earlier years. Not rare. Not dramatic. But noticeable enough to make a professional slow down. And in numismatics, slowing down is always where discovery begins. In 2001, the United States was entering a new technological phase. Cash was still dominant in daily life. Coins were still essential for vending machines, parking meters, and small transactions. But the world around money was changing quickly. Digital banking was expanding. Electronic payments were becoming more common. And mint production systems were adapting to higher efficiency demands. That combination creates a very specific condition in coin history. High output plus stable design plus evolving production pressure. And that condition often produces subtle variation patterns. Not errors in the dramatic sense, but shifts in consistency. The 2001 P. Roosevelt dime was struck in a system designed for volume. Planchets moved continuously. Dice struck at high frequency. Coins exited the press system in constant flow. But here is the part collectors often forget. Dies are not permanent. They wear. And wear is not linear. It accelerates after a threshold. So in 2001 production cycles, many dies were operating in mid to late life stages. That means reduced sharpness in fine details, minor loss of relief definition, slight variation in strike pressure distribution. Nothing dramatic, but enough to be visible under magnification. Even in 2001, every Roosevelt dime maintains its expected weight. 2.268 grams. This number does not change across decades of modern production. It is the structural identity of the coin. But experienced collectors understand something important. Weight confirms composition, not quality. A coin can be perfectly weighted and still show weak strike zones, softened design features, uneven surface flow. So weight is the starting point, never the conclusion. Collectors who handle bulk 2001 P dimes often report a subtle observation. Some coins feel slightly less sharp in design contrast. Not damaged. Not worn. Just less crisp under angled light. Especially in Roosevelt's facial detail. Lettering edges in Liberty. Torch flame separation on reverse. This does not indicate rarity. It indicates production variation across die usage cycles. And variation becomes visible only when coins are compared side by side. Under a 10x loop and controlled lighting, 2001 P dimes begin to reveal consistent microcharacteristics. Faint die polish lines in open fields. Slightly uneven reflectivity across Roosevelt's cheek area. Minor softness in torch flame tips. Reduced contrast between raised and flat design zones. These features are not classified as collectible errors, but they are valuable for understanding production behavior. Because numismatics is not only about rarity, it is also about interpretation of manufacturing history. As in previous years, machine doubling continues to appear in 2001 dimes. It can look like flat secondary edges on letters, slight shadow step effects, doubled appearance on numbers or text. But it is not true doubling. It is mechanical vibration during strike separation. No die duplication is involved. No hubbing error occurs. True doubled die obverse (DDO) remains structurally different and significantly more relevant in collector grading discussions. That difference is critical for valuation accuracy. Collectors often describe 2001 Roosevelt Dimes as sitting between two visual behaviors. Earlier sharpness from previous decades. Later controlled uniformity in mid-2000s. It is not officially categorized as a transitional year. But observationally, bulk sorting reveals slightly more variation in strike crispness compared to some adjacent years. This is not a sign of error. It is a sign of evolving production conditions across die usage cycles. And evolution always leaves traces. In coin analysis, collectors often mentally compare systems across denominations. For example, clad quarters sit around 5.67 grams, while silver quarters are closer to 6.25 grams, depending on composition. A simple digital scale makes these differences immediately visible. But in dimes, everything is compressed into a much smaller physical range. So even though 2.268 grams remains stable, visual variation feels more pronounced relative to size. That is why dimes require closer optical inspection than weight analysis alone. Historical auction records suggest that 2001 P Roosevelt dimes remain common in circulation condition. Even uncirculated examples require certification from PCGS or NGC before being considered in collectible grading tiers. MS65 through MS67 grades define condition-based value discussion levels. Values fluctuate with market conditions, and professional certification is required before any value can be assigned. Raw coins, regardless of appearance, do not automatically carry premium value. Verification is essential. This is a fundamental rule in modern numismatics. In 2001, this dime passed through countless ordinary American moments. A vending machine transaction in a school hallway. A grocery store checkout exchange. A parking meter in a busy city street. A pocket coin forgotten at the end of a long day. No one studied it. No one documented it. No one preserved it intentionally. But decades later, collectors examine it under controlled light, searching for production behavior patterns that were never intended to be individually analyzed. That is the transformation of modern currency. From unnoticed utility to studied artifact. 2001 does not introduce dramatic errors. It does not create famous varieties. But it strengthens something important in this series. The realization that modern Roosevelt dimes are not uniform objects. They are outputs of evolving production conditions. And once that understanding is fully accepted, the final coin in this sequence becomes more interesting than expected. Because the last stage is not about variation anymore. It is about visibility. And what becomes visible when collectors look closely enough?